Broadcasting live from the Business RadioX studio, it's time for Family Business Radio. Showcasing outstanding family businesses and the advisors who assist them.
All right, Happy New Year. You're listening to the first episode of 2025. I am your host, Anthony Chen with Family Business Radio. To kind of kick off the year right, we have an amazing guest with us. We have Bob Tankesley with Exit Team LLC to elucidate the whole culture and the whole process of exit planning for family business or businesses in general. Bob, welcome to the show.
Anthony, thanks much. Hey, congratulations on your upcoming role as president of the XPX Atlanta chapter.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that we just had our meeting like an hour, a couple hours ago when off without a hitch. So just on that, if that's going to be the prequel or the preview for the rest of the year, I'll take it.
Nice.
All right. So kind of share with us a story. Like what is it that got you into the M&A or exit planning side of things?
Oh boy, I took a very circuitous route to get here. Long winding path. Out of grad school in the mid-90s, I started doing cost accounting for a division of a Fortune 500 company that led into a very short stint at Ernst & Young. I was there long enough to learn two things: where the restrooms were and what the partner track looked like, and I was probably not on it. And then I went to the other end of the public accounting spectrum, worked for a one-owner firm here in the Atlanta market. He and I talked partnership, but then I decided to ultimately set up my own shop. That was about 22 years ago. I'd bolted on financial services along the way in your field, and then eventually transitioned over to M&A work 11 years ago and really loved it. It kind of takes me back to my favorite class, either as an undergrad or a grad student. That was business valuation, this notion of assessing business value, a privately held company between parties. And this transaction was never going to see the public markets. This was a buying and selling of a business that had no visibility to it. How do you assess the value? That was the class. Nowadays, I get to transfer that value or help owners transfer that value from themselves to an outside buyer.
So you kind of got a little bit of an appetizer or taste of it in class. What was it about it that kind of stood out to you? And now you're kind of coming full circle practicing what you've learned in class.
This, beyond the models, like a dividend model, for example, for an investment says, let's take all the future dividends and let's bring them back to the present using some present value calculation. That's a way of assessing value. The same thing can be done for a private business. Let's look a little bit, with an eye toward some recent history in terms of the business's performance, but then let's also gauge what future activity and performance of this privately held business is likely to be. Let's apply some formulas to that as well. And magically we come up with a business value that business might be able to sell for out in the open market. It's a process that we go through every time we take a company to market. We have to understand what that range of offers might look like from different kinds of buyers.
So there is, especially like yourself, that is in the know-how of all understanding all the particulars and variables that takes into account the actual business value. But then there's the public perception where they go, oh yeah, my business is worth like 10x because it's $10 million because my golf buddies sold it for 5. So I got to be double than that. Help us break down some of the common myths that you run into when working with business owners.
You nailed probably the number one misconception out there. Hey, my friend sold his business for 10x, 10 times what? 10 times my cash flow, my adjusted EBITDA. Okay, that's great. Well, he was running a SaaS-based business, and that's kind of a multiple that I would expect to see on that kind of business. You're running a light industrial manufacturing business, so I don't think the same multiple is going to apply there. So that's misconception number one, is my friend sold for X. Another one I'm starting to hear more often is, hey, I've noticed some businesses in my industry sold for this amount. Well, that's them. That may not be the case with your business. Frankly, my friend, your business may not even be sellable. That's often a wake-up call when someone gets, talking with a buyer much further down the road and they realize their business actually isn't sellable. A third thing I often hear is, well, I've got an interested buyer That's been happening a lot lately. With as active as private equity has been, with as active as strategic buyers have been, they are approaching the types of companies that I end up talking with, as potentially helping them sell their company. Well, Bob, I've already got an offer on the table. I've already got some interest, and they're telling me that my business, they're ready to buy it for 6 or 7 times EBITDA. Well, that could be just a teaser number that the potential buyer throws out there to get the seller talking.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully they're talking under the terms of an NDA, but the seller needs to know that there's going to be some discounting. There's going to be some due diligence. There's going to be some poking and prodding and digging deep into that business. And that top line number that they gave you of 6 to 7 times EBITDA, you can expect that to be chipped down quite a bit. So there's your 3 areas I see. My friend sold for X. There's businesses in my industry that are selling for this amount. And hey, I've got an offer on the table right now.
And looking more into the future, so you mentioned in terms of now that these private equity are really being aggressive, reaching out to these privately held businesses to buy them up, or the business owners getting more opportunities, or people just unsolicited coming towards them. I understand that you recently just released a book called Exit Teams. Now, is this book more geared towards the business owners who are looking to, either they were already approached or looking to exit, or is it more geared towards advisors that are already working with these business owners thinking of transitioning?
That's a great question. I think it could be suitable for any one of 3 situations. There's already a quote unquote offer on the table, or the business owner already has some semblance of a team of advisors around them, and they're thinking toward exit. They're heading toward exit in some on some timetable. Or the third situation might be they're nowhere near thinking about it. It's so far off into the future. They're young enough, they're energetic enough, healthy enough. Exit hasn't even entered their mind. So I would encourage anybody, to pick up a book like this, which can help them see in a fictional form, yes, a failed sale before that failed sale it happens to them. That's what I wanted to do with the book, was to help the reader, if a business owner, personally experience the loss of not selling your company. Ultimately, our hero sells his book. All stories like this have a good happy ending, but he has to go through a lot of pain and suffering first. And I want people to read that and remember that it doesn't always turn out the way they think, that there can be some pain and some adjustment and some dashed expectations, missed expectations and dashed hopes along the way. If they can read it in book form for $15 for the paperback or
Yes.
$25 for the hardcover, that's great, and save millions of dollars down the road, I would much rather that happen to them than get there and lose all that value.
Yeah, so not to give too much of the book away, it sounds like the way that you wrote it is more of a story form of the mindset of a business owner trying to sell, and just seems like they've made almost every mistake possible into the very end.
Yeah. He goes through a health problem. He goes through the loss of a key customer, like his top customer. He is approached by a buyer, a private equity firm, and then he's told that his company is worth a lot less than he thought it would. So he ends up losing that potential buyer. All this happens right in about the middle of the book in a very short sequence of events. Really causes him to think, hey, am I really doing this correctly? Back up to a high level, the book kind of follows a familiar pattern of that we see in movies or in literary artworks throughout time, and that is, hey, everything's great until it's not. Then something bad happens. Okay, let's fix it. Wait a minute, we really messed it up. Let's fix it even harder.
Let's double down.
Yeah, we messed it up more than we can undo it. We need help. We've hit the bottom. We need help. Help arrives. There's some adjustments, some painful adjustments that need to be made, but ultimately, because the right course of action was chosen, our hero ends up selling his company for more than he thought he could get. I've seen that tale. Yes, this is a fictional book, but it's a composite of a lot of different business owners I've met over the years. I've seen this play out before. I've seen the difference between an owner that went to market that had some semblance of a team around him, but maybe not even a fully built out team, but it was something. And then the other extreme is too often the case, and that is owners who go to market or are contemplating an exit or it's years in advance, years ahead, and all they have is just one or two people of what should be a really fully built out advisory team around them.
Well, yes, then comes kind of the almost too obvious of a question is for the business owners that are either doing it themselves or maybe have one or two or just very a skeleton crew in terms of a team of having a highest value exit. Is it because they simply are not aware of the full scope of services in the exit planning sphere, or are us as advisors not doing a good enough job marketing and branding the message? Or is it just kind of their own specific choice of trying to be, well, to put it more bluntly, cheap on the cost side to maximize what they perceive to be more money in their pocket? Like, or is it something else?
I would say it's those two things at least. The advisors around the owner, don't come together and don't collaborate, as we say in XPX. They don't put the client first. They don't decide who's needed and when they're needed. Some advisors to an owner, and again, for our audience, we're not just talking about financial advisors. When we use the term advisors, we're talking very, very broadly. Pretty much anybody the business owner would listen to in terms of getting guidance on how to run their business better. Cost is a second factor. Okay, so advisors aren't talking to each other; they're not collaborating well. Cost is a second factor. I would say control. The need for control, the need to have total input on how a business is run, to totally determine how that business is run. Business owners have a high need for control. I think we can all safely say that.
Yeah.
Let's throw in a fourth. I think this runs throughout the book, and that is this boundless sense of optimism. You really have to be optimistic to run a business, whether you bought it from someone or you started it and built it. You got to be pretty optimistic about, putting your name on something or being so closely tied to something and pour 60, 70, 80 hours a week of yourself into it. It's not like working for someone else. You've got multiple bosses when you run a business. You have every customer, at least all the major ones, are your boss. You don't just have one employer. So here you are, you're making all these decisions, and it's kind of a self-reinforcing loop. I swear, I think there's a little drop of dopamine that hits somewhere in the brain every time a decision is made by a business owner, good, bad, or indifferent, that just says, I am the captain of my ship. I know how to run this thing. And that's a hard cycle to break. You watch somebody do that over 20, 30 plus years, very difficult cycle to break. There's an element of control in there, but there's a high amount of optimism that's baked into how they do things day after day. Anthony, that optimism, though, comes back and bites them on the back end when they try to sell their company, because I've seen too many times owners think there's going to be a long line of buyers waiting outside their door on the day they're ready to sell. And some of those buyers are even going to be waiving premium offers.
You're telling me that doesn't happen?
I'm here to tell you that does not happen. Only 4% of companies ever sell.
I remember that conversation a couple of years back. Yeah. The statistic was pretty stark.
Yeah. And owners are, I hate to say it, but they're doing it to themselves. Too many of them are doing it to themselves. If they would just let that advisory team around them form and help guide and give some input, the likelihood of a better outcome is just incredible.
Then coming around to the theme of family business, because that's kind of what this podcast is really focused on, is the assumption, I guess, other myth is, I just pass the keys or the torch on to the next generation. Not like that's ever gone wrong before. No. Can you kind of give some insight into that in terms of that kind of level of transition, how that might be different from, let's say, a sale to a PE?
Yeah. Obviously, in my day job, I deal with outside parties a lot. That's where the buyer pool comes from. But if your buyer is on the inside, creates an entirely different dynamic that the owner needs to consider. You take all the complexity, you take all that can go right and wrong in a business, and then you overlay family involvement on top of that, and the family dynamics take over from there. I mean, you might hire people who really, you might have people on your payroll that are family also who really don't belong, who really aren't performing, up to what the standards would be if you hired someone from the outside. So that's a part of it. You might think that your family member have more of a of a sense of obligation or a sense of ownership or a sense of entrepreneurialism that they might not actually have, but they're family, and you want them to want the business. Seen that too many times. You might think as an owner, in your mid-60s that your 25-year-old son or your 30-year-old niece is capable of running this business in your shoes if you just give them a couple years of transition time. That's kind of that's a thought that might need to be examined. You're telling me something that it took you, an owner, 20, 25, 30 years to learn can suddenly be learned by someone that is, maybe they've been shadowing you for a couple of years. Very difficult to transition the business. And then, like I said, you overlay the emotions and the dynamics of a family on top of that. I'm not saying it can't be done. In fact, most inside buyers end up being family. I guess the second category is probably something like key people, but you still have this issue of the owner still being tied risk-wise to the business unless the inside buyer goes outside the business and gets outside funding from a bank or some other source to actually buy the business, to actually perform a purchase of the business. But typically it's done out over time. The owner takes a salary. The owner keeps getting the lease payments on the real estate that they own, that the business occupies. Yeah.
So how do you have these kinds of conversations? Let's call this person a cousin visiting that technically shouldn't be on the payroll. It's like, what people are going like, what is he doing here?
Yeah.
Oh, he's kind of like hanging around. How do you have these kind of tough conversations with the business owner and let them know, okay, if the inside transition is just not realistic to maximize the value for them, at least in their best interest.
Yeah, great point.
You got to go out and find a PE.
Yep. Yeah. Are you just looking at this inside buyer, family or not, as some convenient buyer, and they're there? You think they're your best buyer, or do you want to go out and shop the market, so to speak, see what the range of offers might look like from different owners? I guess there's one of two extremes there. You're not capturing the value you should. The other extreme is, well, you're part of the 96% of companies that are never going to sell anyway. So let's put it in the hands of someone, even if the payout is over time. So these are deep and tough conversations that need to be had. You always got to keep in mind too, there's a fixed amount of cash flow that a business is capable of generating. If the owner's got to get paid, the inside buyer's got to get paid as well. And they're going to be taking on a lot more responsibility, putting in a lot more hours. They're probably going to want their pay to come up. So business owner wants to sell to that inside buyer. Are they willing to take a small and perhaps decreasing amount of compensation while the inside buyer, their compensation is rising? Again, difficult conversations to have, but it depends on where the owner is in their lives, how their personal finances have been structured, and then what the personal financial needs are of the inside buyer. These are, again, there's a theme here, tough conversations that need to be had years in advance.
So whether we're looking at just strictly a family business or a more of an enterprise level business, is there any stark differences in terms of their planning window or exit window? Or is it very similar? It's just that with a family business, you've got that family emotional element to it.
I would say it depends on how much work needs to be done. When the owner wants to step out totally, or begin to step out over some period of time, how much work is left to be done? I call it how optimized is the company. With an outside buyer, we kind of know what they're going to be looking at. When you take a company to market, one company, you end up talking with 20, 30, 40 different types of buyers, individual buyers, and you're constantly hearing from them what's wrong with the company that you've got on the market, the company that they're looking at buying. And there's some refrain that runs through that. So when you do this deal, after talking with an M&A advisor or a complete team around them, you begin to learn this theme that runs through the ways that a lot of buyers think, outside buyers think. So you can kind of see these problems being raised as problems by the buyer before even going to market. And that's what you can do with kind of a team-based approach, is have everybody look at it from the outside as if they were the buyer's team. ultimately what you want to do is, whether you inside sell or outside sell, you want the owner to begin thinking like a buyer years in advance. That's what one of my phrases I've got there on the outside of my book, and it kind of runs through the book. An owner who can think like a buyer, long before they become a seller, is a very difficult mind shift to make. But whether it's an outside buyer or an inside buyer, it's a mind shift that they must make. Mm-hmm. Fix the problems before anybody has a chance to look at the business. Mm-hmm. Fix the problems as a seller, as an owner, before you become a seller, while you still have your own health, money to pay for the advisors and to make the improvements to the company, the right people inside the business, and enough time. Frankly, time is running out for all of us, but health has turned out to be a big thing lately. So health, other people, money, and time, when you address those issues and you look at everything through the eyes of a buyer, you end up with a more optimized business ready to hand off to that inside buyer or to sell to that outside buyer for maximum price. Mm-hmm. Thinking like a buyer is an incredibly difficult thing to do, but so important if you plan on exiting for money.
Yeah, particularly, I'm glad you bring it up, because I kind of hammered that point for my clientele, is that when they come with the assumption, getting back to that first myth, it's worth this much. It's okay. Well, let's say you do have the money. Would you buy your own business for that much?
Oh, that's good.
And then instantly their mood changes. Well, hold on a second. You just told me your business is worth X amount, but if it's your own money, wait, yeah, they know all about the other stuff that's going on.
That is good.
Behind the scenes.
Yep.
Like, not so sure about that. Well, the other buyers are not going to be coming in blindfolded. They're going to find out.
And they're not gentle. Mm-hmm. And their due diligence has gotten longer. Here we are, like you said, first part of 2025, post-COVID environment that we're in, but risk is on everybody's mind.
Yeah.
Buyers especially. Mm-hmm. When they're taking a look at a business, they're digging deep. They're asking tough questions. Their due diligence is getting longer. Fewer deals are getting out of due diligence than before COVID. Mm-hmm. So that tells us they're finding problems that they wish had been corrected before they got involved.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of these problems for the buyers, or rather the buyers are finding out, what is like the top 3 theme or just constantly keeps coming up that just kills deals?
Yeah, these are great questions. I would say top of the list would be owner dependence. It's probably the number one reason why those 96% of businesses don't sell. Mm-hmm. The business is just too dependent on the owner. The owner is the business is the owner. They're almost inseparable. Mm-hmm. The buyer looks at that and they say, wait a minute, what am I buying? After closing, we step into your shoes. What's left? You're taking it with you. Mm-hmm. You're taking the relationships. You're taking the knowledge. You might have some key people, but are they going to be around? Mm-hmm. Very difficult conversations need to be had about how dependent the business is on the owner. I don't know where this falls, how far away from that level, from that type of concern buyers have, but somewhere near the top 3, I would imagine 2 would be the continuity of revenue. Is it revenue that can and should be contractualized? Mm-hmm. Is it revenue that basically is like an annuity stream? They wake up January 1st of every year, and how much of last year's revenue is going to persist into this year? Mm-hmm. Probably another top 3 concern would be customer concentration. Mm-hmm. If too high of a percentage of the revenue is dependent on too few customers or clients, buyers will most certainly pick up on that, and then the discounting from the offer price, the asking price, just keeps going down from there.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the phrase or term discounting or price for those that are not in the know. I mean, it kind of gives it away just by the term, but letting our listeners know, okay, so you've got an X base amount, as you mentioned, the sticker price, but then the discounting, and you hit some of the key points. What are other things that, as they're going to do due diligence, that just really hammers on that discounting side of things?
Yeah. Maybe, we mentioned the top 3, but other things might include key employees. Are they bound by non-competes, non-disclosures? Do they have employment contracts? What does their comp look like relative to competitors? They'll never really know until they sit down and ask each employee, are you close to leaving? Are you happy? Where are you being fully utilized? Are you productive here? Do you think you think you're being fairly compensated?
Yeah.
That's something I find, again, post-COVID, I find more buyers being concerned about the human capital element than they have well, in my career, 22 years.
So it almost sounds like, because I remember right after COVID, it was, if you can fog a mirror, businesses were just being bought like hotcakes. Now you mentioned now they're really coming in with a microscopic lens, going through due diligence. And I'm glad that you mentioned on the human capital side, it's not just the EBITDA and the bean counting or the quality of earnings. Now they're taking into account on the human capital of employment satisfaction, because we just had our luncheon where the economists talk about that labor side of things, and that how hard it is to find and retain employees. How, as part of building a deal team or exit team, how critical is that of having a professional really work that into in terms of creating an exit plan for the business owner?
It's critical. It's critical. I can't. I don't have. I think we're done with that question. No, seriously. As much as my left brain wants to say, "Hey, it all comes down to the numbers," it's not. The people drive the numbers. You got to get the people right. Got to be in the right seats on the bus. I think, I've heard some human capital folks say, is everyone being properly utilized, compensated, involved, empowered? We got to remember, when the owner leaves, it's the people that don't have ownership that remain. Have processes and procedures been documented, diligently and thoroughly documented? Do people understand how workflow runs through the business? I think most owners would admit they're the ones that know, and not too many other people within the business. Obviously, it depends on the size of the company, but if we're talking about companies that gross $5, $10, $15 million, you can have serious dysfunction where everything that is known about running the business well is in the owner's mind, and that's not what the buyer is buying. They're buying the absence of an owner. Sophisticated buyers would prefer to have a business that runs no matter who owns it. Key people should be left behind knowing as many things that make a business run well as possible.
So then that kind of touches on another key point, because we touched on business owner wanting to go and become a business, not just because they're optimistic, but that element of control. And I guess kind of that pride and joy of, I know how to run my business. I have it all in my head. While it may serve them growing the business, not so much on the buyer side. How would you have that conversation, helping them have that change of mindset, or even doable of, hey, you need to start writing this down, because otherwise the business is not worth buying at all?
I think two ways to answer that question. One, you kind of brought up a few minutes ago, and that is, what would you pay for your own company? That's an important feedback loop to put in front of the business owner. The other way I would address it would be, this is what we've seen buyers pay attention to. This is what we've seen buyers focus on. This is what we've seen. This is what they say they wish was fixed. Sophisticated buyers I'm talking about, not buyers who want to pick up a business for 30 cents on the dollar at a steep discount, but sophisticated buyers that are willing to pay a top price, which a lot of sellers would like to get a top price, but there's a template to follow. I won't say it's an easy template to follow, but there's a template. We know, because they tell us often, we know how buyers think. If we know that ahead of time, then let's adjust the company. Let's optimize the company to get it to that point where fewer buyers are objecting, more buyers are offering full price offers. That's how you get there, is, I think, with a buyer's mindset. That's at least how I lean into business owners, is remind them, I've seen and heard what buyers say on a regular basis. This is what they tell me. They haven't looked at your company maybe, but this is what they're probably going to tell me that they wish was fixed. And I'm not the only voice. As I say in the book, the M&A advisor is not just the only voice on the owner's exit team or exit planning team. Other advisors need to have some input on that as well, because they have specialty areas that they work within. Finance, legal, marketing, IT, HR, all those voices need to be heard.
So a lot of our conversation has been more around mitigating or reducing how much a price could be discounted. On the other side, ideally in a rainbow and butterfly world, is not only do we get full price, we get a premium price where we get buyers that are looking to outbid each other. What are some of the factors that you see businesses that are not only successful getting a full price, but there's actually a pricing war because of something that they did that is that outstanding?
Yeah. I would say top of the list is probably you're more profitable than your peers.
Mm.
Your net profit, your gross margins, your net income margin, your bottom line profit, higher than industry standards, higher than anything the buyer might have looked at.
Mm-hmm.
I would say also you've got your key people are stellar. They've been with you for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
They've got, key roles. They've got a vested interest. They're really into their jobs. They can't see themselves working anywhere else.
Mm-hmm.
Thirdly, maybe you've got some intellectual property, trademarks, social media following, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
The intellectual property banner has gotten pretty wide. A lot falls under that. All these things contribute, all this IP can contribute to goodwill, this extra over and above the book value or the asking price that the buyer might be willing to pay. A lot of this is generated in ways that are basically invisible. Ask any valuation person, intangibles in the small business world, and I don't know where you draw that line, call it 30, 40 million in revenue and under, but intangible assets have come to represent a larger and larger portion, a larger and larger percentage of purchase prices of small businesses. That's because there was something special about this business that was identified by a buyer or more than one buyer that were made to compete against each other. But there was something special about it that they had to have it. Maybe fourth might be, contracts, contractualized revenue, supplier relationships, geographic dominance. These are some of the common things that I see and hear buyers say that, wow, they're really glad that they see in this business, and for that reason, it's worth a premium. Sellers tend to get a larger price. This is not a universal statement, but they tend to get a higher price from strategic buyers as opposed to financial buyers. And you can kind of put buyers into those two broad categories. A financial buyer is buying it purely for its cash flow needs, its ability to financially integrate with other companies that it might own. Strategic buyers, on the other hand, see reasons for doing a deal that go far and above the financial aspects. Yeah, there's a great return on investment and healthy cash flow, but there are other outside of financial statement reasons for doing the deal.
And guys, this abstract and intangible is being hammered home by an MBA and CPA. So you're not going to hear this too often from a left brain or analytic person and numbers person talking about, hey, look at the non-numbers as well.
That's true.
So for our listeners, okay, I got all this homework that I need to think about on mitigating loss of discount, prepping my business to potentially not only get to the full price, but hopefully, ideally getting a premium. What is the time where, when should I start working on this to exit time?
Yeah, great question. Ideally, I say 3 to 5 years. Any more than that, if you tell an owner, look, we're going to be at this for 60 months, they're going to get glassy eyed. They're going to be, no thanks, I'm not signing up for that. But realistically, Anthony, anything less than about 2.5, 3 years for most industries, for most business models, that's just not enough time to convince a future buyer. And think about the lending side of it too. That's not enough time to convince a future lender if capital is being lent to do the deal, to do the purchase later on. 3 to 5 years seems to be that magic window. You can affect enough change in the business, you can increase value enough and make it sticky and make it believable to your buyer and whatever capital source they have.
So we at least have a kind of a window of 3 to 5 years to retirement. But then you also, early on, we had a conversation of always having that buyer mindset, prepping the business, whether it doesn't matter whether it's 3 or 5 years out or even 10 years out. I assume that's kind of rare for a business owner to think that far ahead. But what is is there value to at least have some of these exercises, even though they don't fall in that traditional 3 to 5 year time frame?
Like shorter than that?
Or even longer. Let's say, for example, someone who has just started and they're 5 years in the business.
Okay.
And they know, they understand the value of planning out and say, I'm not going to be in this business for forever. I know eventually I'll sell.
All owners exit.
Yeah,
right?
eventually, right? So they know that in the back of their head.
Yep.
They just don't know, when do I start getting this exit team in place? Because they're still pretty far away.
Yeah. I think at least two things come into play there. One would be to separate as best you can, separate yourself from your business. In your mind, think, this is a separate entity from me. I'm going to build this so that it, like you used the word enterprise a few minutes ago, I'm going to build this so that it doesn't matter who owns this business. This is going to be what we in the business advisory world called an enterprise level business, which is the opposite end of the spectrum from a lifestyle business. I would say to that owner of 5 years or so, please do everything you can to treat it as a separate entity, not as an ATM machine. You know, John, John, Ray, and I, and others that give financial advice, we've probably seen, you know, a lot of things on financial statements. We've seen the boat, the plane, the multiple cars, the vacation home.
You're telling me the boat and Lambo is not a qualified business expense? What are we working here?
Sorry for everyone who's listening. No judgment. You know, do what you want on a tax return, but when it comes time to proving your financials to an outside buyer, all that's got to be cleaned up. Another reason to go 3 to 5 years. You know, clean that stuff up, run good solid books, make it sticky, make it provable. The other thing I would say to that 5-year owner operator, begin to form your team, begin to see who's going to be critical on that team, not just at the very end, you know, when it comes time to do a deal, like a valuation person, M&A person, transaction attorney, but who do you need on your team years in advance of that? Who's going to help your company make it better than it would have been otherwise? I think we can put CPA, you know, at or near the top of the list. Banker, wealth advisor, you know, maybe an outside CFO, people who are strong in numbers and can help build a long-term track record of good financial management of that business. And then along the way, you know, as cash flow permits, you can layer on the other stuff to an increasing degree. And that's, you know, the marketing, the IT, the HR, the stuff that matters, you know, that helps make the revenue more sticky, more repeatable going forward. It all this helps build a more believable story when it comes time to sell. But you may not have enough cash flow to add all these advisors at once, but that's probably the rank order I would say, you know, advisors need to be added to your team.
Well, you hear that, listeners? We have an accountant here advocating for IT, marketing, and all this human capital where I guess I would say in the stereotype of bean counters, they're all seen as expensive, but here you're advocating them as an investment for the business and the business owner.
I'll leave your listeners with this phrase: you can have it now, or you can have it later. The have it now is no, I don't want to spend money on all that. I don't believe in my business, you know, that my business needs improving, or I don't think it can make any difference. I'm just going to spend my money, keep it a lifestyle business. That's fine. That comes at the expense necessarily of not being able to sell it later or sell it for far less than your peers might be able to that have run more of an enterprise level firm. The have it later means sacrifice now, buy what needs to be bought, pay for what needs to be paid for, on the strong belief that it's going to result in greater value later. So you can have your value now and chip away at it and eat at it a little bit at a time now, or you can save a nice big meal out there in the future called a transaction, where someone or more than one person, more than one buyer looks at your business and says, yeah, this is something I've got to have.
Well, and as we're kind of closing out our conversation, we touched a lot in terms of value of how to build a team, the necessity of a team, some of the big factors that would discount or drive a premium of a business. So circling back to building a team, the follow-up question as we're kind of closing out the show here is, for business owners, what questions would you recommend that they ask as they're interviewing other advisors or building their team out 3 or 5 years out? What are the top, let's call it 2 or 3 questions they should ask of every advisor to be a really good determining factor of whether or not that advisor fits in their team?
Yep.
So we'll leave with that.
Yep.
That being said, now we've coming around to the fun part, the complete disclosure section here of the show. So this show is sponsored and brought to yours truly, myself, Anthony Chen, with Lighthouse Financial Network. Securities and advisory services offered through Osaic, member FINRA, SIPC. Mosaic is separately owned, and other entities and or marketing names, products, or services referenced here are independent of Mosaic. Main office address is 575 Broad Hollow Road out in Melville, New York, 11. You can best reach me either by email, which is really just my full name, Anthony Chen, CHEN, at lfnllc.com, or connect with me on the LinkedIn or my office number at 631-465-9090. Now, coming back to Bob, again, the question was for our listeners and business owners that are contemplating building out their own exit team, what is like the universal like top 2 or 3 questions they should ask of every advisor before they bring them on?
Once you get past the usual, how long have you been in the business? What special degrees do you have? What projects have you worked on? What clients can I get references from? That kind of plain vanilla type of questioning. I would then ask them a very pointed question, something along the lines of, how well do you collaborate with others? Now, their collaboration experience may come out as they talk to you about projects they've worked on, or as they give you references, and those references might say, oh yeah, that guy's a real team player, or yeah, she's outstanding. You would do really well to have her on your team. If the feedback comes back, or if the response from the potential advisor comes back that says, gives you the hint in any way that they're not a team player, run. It's just not going to work out well. That's just been my experience. A well-collaborating, well-functioning team around the owner is critical. I really can't say any more about it. That's pretty much the whole premise of the book. I've seen this happen too many times where different service providers try to get the owner's attention all to themselves and buy what it is that I'm selling. That might be 2 or 3 steps down the road, and they jump to the front of the line. It's something that happens too often, but a team around the owner, though they may not be under the same umbrella or part of the same entity, but a team that plays well is a team that's going to put more points on the board.
Definitely. Thank you. And before we close out, how can our listeners best find you and understand more insights on the exit side of things, the M&A side of things, and perhaps maybe even learn a little bit more from your book?
Sure. Email address, bob@exitteams, team is plural.com. Phone number, which I always like, 770-633-1083. You can find me on LinkedIn as well, Bob, and last name spelled Tankesley. Various social media platforms as well. We're starting to market the book pretty heavily here in 2025.
Well, thank you, Bob.
Thanks, Anthony.
All right. Now, as we're kind of closing out the show, we have a little what's called Anthony's Financial Take, and taking some perspective and insights from our recent guest here, Bob, with the question of how to best find the right advisor. What's the question to ask? For me, my go-to question or recommendation is ask them, what would need to happen at the 5 and 10 year mark for you to be able to look back and say, this was a good decision for us to decide to work with you? If they don't ask a similar question, well, what does the end point look like? What does success look like? It is almost impossible for any advisor, it doesn't matter if it's financial planning, CPA, or whomever, to create any plan. It's almost like going to an architect and say, hey, design me a house, and expecting the architect to come with a blueprint and not even know what a square footage or how many bedrooms or bathrooms are. So if that's the case, and there's, oh yeah, I'm going to design a plan, and they even ask the most basic questions, seconding to what Bob said, you probably should run. That being said, thank you for listening in to Family Business Radio.